Continuation of the Maimer והקריתם לכם ערים, which was from Shabbos Parshas Matos Masei, Shabbos Mevorchim Menachem of Tafshin Yud Beis. The Maimer, the Rebbe is explaining the idea of Adam HaRishon, how Adam HaRishon's sin of Eitz Hadas was the concept of killing, because he caused death for all future generations. And that Hashem enabled him, just like Hashem enabled Ari Niklat, Hashem enabled him to run away and to be exiled from Gan Eden rather than having to die, because here he's a murderer and yet Hashem considered as unintentional. And the general concept that the Rebbe explains in the Maimer is the fact that when a person does an Aveda, he's actually also doing the same idea, because he's taking away the chayes, the sustenance, that's supposed to go to the Adam of Kedusha, to the godly soul, and instead he's channeling it over to Adam of Klippa, to the animal soul and to the Klippas. Which is the concept that when a person does an Aveda, he's Moisef Chayes. He's adding sustenance to the Klippas, and this is why he's considered to be a murderer. Because he's bringing the Chayes of Kedusha, he's taking it away from Kedusha. He's taking the life away from Kedusha and giving it instead to Klippa. And the question was, Klippa is also an existence that exists because Hashem made it exist. And if Hashem wouldn't constantly be giving it sustenance, it wouldn't be able to exist. How is it possible that we say that a person adds sustenance in Klippa? What does that mean to add sustenance in Klippa? And the explanation that the Rebbe explains is by first explaining why we say that Klippa doesn't have sustenance. And first the Rebbe explains also the idea that really Klippa exists for a reason, because in the beginning of Avodah, a person does have to have a certain type of yeshus, a certain type of existence, that the Yetzer Hara tries to convince him, who are you to serve Hashem? You're nothing anyway, and he has to feel, no, I'm something, and I can and should and will serve Hashem. But later on in the Avodah, just like the shell of a fruit, that one has to take it off and throw it out, because it's not necessary anymore. In the same thing, in the beginning of the Avodah, there has to be that concept of Klippa. Klippa which is outside of Kedusha. Not something which is part of Klippa, but rather something of the fact that a person feels, I exist. There has to be a certain type of existence, and that's necessary for Kedusha. But that's only something which isn't part of it. But if now, after I start doing my Avodah, and I feel yeshus from my Avodah, I feel ego coming from the Avodah itself, which means that I enabled the Klippa, which is what Adam HaRishon did. He brought Klippa and Kedusha mixed together. I enabled the Klippa to be part of my Avodah, not just a purpose, a reason that caused me to be able to do Avodah. But now with my Avodah, I feel an existence. That becomes a problem. That could be that it should come to it, the Rebbe says in Shulchan Aruch, to the Rasha who serves Hashem with ego and pride, Hashem says, why are you learning my Torah? Through learning my Torah, you're adding chayes, you're adding sustenance to Klippas until you go and do tshuva. Now to understand better and more fully what is really the difference between Kedusha and Klippa, and why do we say that Kedusha doesn't need chayes? Klippa needs chayes that has to come from Kedusha, even though it was created by Hashem as well. So in order to understand that, the Rebbe continues to explain in the Maimer the difference between the existence of Kedusha and the existence of Klippa. Kedusha exists on its own, which means Kedusha has what we call a chayes atzmi. Its life is part of it. That's what it's all about. Klippas don't have their own life. Their whole life is the fact that they get sustenance from Kedusha. Like we said, Hashem allowed there to be a Klippa in order that it should be able. It's another reason in order that it should be able to give chayes to Kedusha. Let's try and understand this idea first before we continue on to explain the way it's explained in the Maimon. One of the things that Chassidus teaches us is that in Kedusha, the Chayus is part of it, whereas in Klippa it's a separate thing. This is brought out in the fact that in Kedusha it's Eser V'loi Teisha, Eser V'loi Achadasar. Kedusha is made up specifically of the 10 Sfiras, only 10, not 9, which would be less than what's necessary, but also not 11, whereas in Klippa, we say that specifically there's a Chadasar, Kisrin de Misavusa, the crowns of Klippa are 11. What's the difference between the two? In Kedusha, the sustenance that sustains it, the godliness that makes it exist, becomes part of it. It becomes internalized in it until it's part of it. So if there's 10 channels of energy, then there's 10. There's no 11. Whereas in Klippa, we call it Kisrin the Misavusa, crowns of impurity. A crown means it's above it. We explained already previously, and let's explain that idea again. What is really in essence the difference between Kedusha and Klippa? Kedusha means a place where godliness is revealed, where it's felt. Why is godliness felt? Because you look at it and you see in it its true essence, which is godliness, and that there is nothing else. And that if it wouldn't be for the chayis, for the sustenance from Hashem, it would disappear. Klippa, on the other hand, even though in truth it also can't exist without the sustenance, without the chayis from Hashem, but the whole point is that you don't feel its chayis. You don't feel its sustenance and its life from where it comes. That's why in Klippa there's 11, because it's kisrin, it's a crown, it's above it. Its chayis above it is not felt inside it. That's the essential difference between Kedusha and Klippa. And that's why Klippa can be a shell that covers over Kedusha, because it doesn't feel its chayis, its sustenance, which also comes from holiness, which also comes from Hashem. And on the contrary, it covers over that it enables one to think that the existence that exists is a real existence. And that's why the essence of Klippa is yeshus, existence, ego, and the essence of Kedusha is bittul, nullification, because I feel it's not me. I'm totally given over, and my whole existence is the godly power that sustains me. Now that we understand this, now let's go back. Kedusha has a chayus atzmi. What is the meaning of chayus atzmi? It's essentially alive. Its entire existence and life, and as we explained last time, that its entire existence and life comes from the fact that there is the energy, the life, the godly energy which comes into the keli, which comes into the vessel, because had the energy not been there, everything would be like a body without a soul, and if Hashem's will that wants it to exist wouldn't be there, then the whole thing wouldn't exist at all. Kedusha feels that. It has that chayus atzmi, that essential life, that it is a real existence. Klippa doesn't have a chayus atzmi. One of the main differences between Kedusha and Klippa, you see the difference between a Jew and a Goy. Why do we say, Chassidus asks the question, we know that it says, Shema Yisrael, Hashem Elokeinu, Hashem Echad. Here, Yisrael, Hashem is one. Why Shema Yisrael? Only a Jew was commanded the mitzvah of Yichud Hashem, of the unification of Hashem. A guy is also not allowed to worship idols. But a guy wasn't commanded the mitzvah of Yichud, meaning Shituf, duality, For a guy to think, yes, Hashem is the one who created everything. He's the one in charge. But there's something else also that exists. For a guy, that is fine. That's not considered idol worship. He's not going against the Sheva Mitzvahs Bnei Noach. For a Jew, Chas v'Shalom, to think there's something else other than Hashem, even if it will be the holiest thing in the world. A Jew is not allowed to have a memutza, an intermediary between him and Hashem. It can't even be an angel. It can't even be something holy, because the only existence that can exist is Hashem. Why is it that this mitzvah is for Jews and not for Goyim? Because each one, the question is, where is the source of their sustenance? The sustenance of a Jew comes from Pnimius Haratzin, from the inner will of Hashem. The inner will of Hashem is in a way that it's for its purpose on its own, which means the sustenance of a Jew, he is part of Hashem. He's not there as a means for another end. The end and the purpose is in him himself. And since it's from the inner will of Hashem, where the essence is the essence itself, therefore it can't, because that's where his sustenance is, to have something else other than that goes against his existence. Whereas a guy, the place where his existence comes from, to make that mistake and think that there's something else doesn't go against his mitzvahs, and therefore it's not an aveda for him. Because his sustenance comes from chitzonius haratzin. A guy is here, l'sheves yitzara, in order to settle the world. It's not him himself. He doesn't have that idea of the neshama, which is totally part of Hashem. That's where the difference between Kedusha and Klippa. Kedusha is a chayis atzmi. It's there for itself. Its existence is godliness, and it feels that existence of godliness. Whereas Klippa is not a chayus atzmi. It's there in order to do something, in order to fulfill a mission. And that's why we said, in Klippa, in the beginning of the Avodah, in order to enable the person to be able to serve Hashem and not to think, who am I to serve Hashem? The Klippa is there necessary. But once it becomes part of the Avodah, it becomes a thing on its own, that I feel an ego from my serving Hashem, that's l'rasha amalikim, that adds chayis and klippas. Hence, now the Rebbe goes on to explain that this is also the idea of the light, the godly light that comes into the world. The light that comes from above, the light, the spiritual light, is different than the physical light. In a physical light, the ma'or, the luminary, the source of the light necessitates light. As soon as there is a source of light, as soon as there's a light bulb, as soon as there's a sun, as soon as there's a fire, light happens automatically. Whereas the light from above, the ma'or, the source of light, doesn't necessitate light. It's dependent on will, on Hashem's will, that He decides that the ma'or should shine. It doesn't happen on its own. For Hashem, the ability to shine and the ability not to shine are equal. There's no must. Nothing is must. Nothing is necessary in Him. So He can either shine or not shine. There could be revealed to Him something or not. That's not something which is a must. It's not something which is necessary, because nothing is necessary in Hashem. And like the Rambam says, if they would all not exist, He would still continue to exist. And if one could imagine that He doesn't exist, nothing else would be able to exist. His existence doesn't necessitate that there has to be anything else. So now the question is, if so, the oil, the light, the energy from godliness that sustains the spiritual world of Kedusha, it's not a chayus atzmi, it's not an essential thing, It's not something which is there by its very essence, because it came only as a result of his will, of his desire that there should be light. We just said that in Kedusha it's a chayus atzmi, which means it's not life that comes from something else, it's life that comes from itself. Its sustenance comes from itself, its very existence, and therefore in Kedusha it can't tolerate anything else. Because in Kedusha it's there for itself, because its existence is on its own, but it's not. Even Kedusha, even the highest level of Oir of Kedusha is only there once Hashem decided it should be there. And so the Rebbe says no. It's true that in Kedusha, it only is there once Hashem decided it should be there. But once He did decide that the light should come, because the whole point of oir, of light, of energy that shines is that it's batal, it's given over to its source, it's nullified, its entire existence is its source, it becomes the same thing as the source. And just like the source, its existence comes from itself. There's nothing that forces it to come. The oir becomes in the same way, so that the oir of Kedusha becomes what we call a chayus atzmi. Its existence becomes its own existence.